So thank you for joining Students' Emotion Labour and researching students' emotion labour in online classes. I'll try to talk about why I think students' emotion labour is worthy of being a research topic, and the things that I've thought about in terms of trying to reduce emotion labour if a teacher can help students to get through that process in a less laborious way, the communication process. So, the idea of emotion labour or emotion work was first articulated by Arlie Hochschild, a sociologist in America in the 1970s, and she was focusing on service industry personnel, for example, cabin attendants, and how in order to get through the social interaction, which is part of their daily life and daily work, they have to work on their emotions and change their own emotions, and sometimes to suppress or control negative emotions. This has become very hot research topic among people who research teachers. And so I'm interested in looking at questions today about students. Do students try to change and suppress their emotions in class? I think the answer is probably yes. And there are one or two research studies which already show this in a very entertaining way, which I'll mention right away. Sarah Mercer at the University of Graz in Austria interviewed students about whether they ever fake engagement in the class. And all of her informants said, yes, sometimes we fake engagement. And the reasons are we're worried about getting a bad grade, or we don't want to make the teacher feel uncomfortable, or we don't want to make our classmates feel uncomfortable. So that was a very interesting insight, which I think is difficult to get that level of trust that students will tell you that they're changing or suppressing their emotions, but we can see that they're going through some quite complicated processes, which are not only the academic process. Second focus question today, was silence in a Zoom session impacted by emotion labour? We'll look at some of the interview responses and some of the survey responses from a quite large survey, which Stephanie Lim and I did at Miyazaki International College last year, and which I did again with the collaboration of colleagues at 2 other universities this year. And the last 2 questions are questions which I'll ask you to think about and do a little activity about if you have time to stay around that long. How do teachers categorize tasks in relation to emotion labour? Do we ever think about the contribution that we're demanding from students in terms of emotion labour, and what can mitigate emotion labour? What could make it easy and relaxed for students? If we look at this quotation from Conno and Miller, which is written about teachers' emotion labour, it's quite interesting to see what happens if you just switch the word service worker or teacher and just slot students into there. Hochschild demonstrated that emotion labour efforts are tied to how students' performances are evaluated, legitimated and rewarded, even though those efforts are rarely overtly acknowledged as labour. The feeling rules of schools and classrooms, though usually implicit and often subconsciously recognised, shape what students believe they should feel and how they should perform emotions. So here's a little bit more about our survey. And in fact, Stephanie, who's here, thank you, has published a little bit about it. Unfortunately, we didn't publish our results yet. But one of the interesting things we found was that, in fact, the technology aspect doesn't seem to really affect willingness to communicate as much as things like the interlocutor and the topic and the group size. With a larger survey population this year, again, it seemed that although people seem to express that communicating online is slightly uncomfortable, they're not necessarily less going to actually do it less. When I was looking at the data, I tried to focus on emotions, really because of the kind of reading that I started doing when trying to understand the responses in the first time of the survey. Let's review the willingness to communicate pyramid. If you look at the top of the pyramid, you can see that's where people actually will break out into speech and overcome that threshold of reluctance or embarrassment to say what they want to say. And so going from the bottom up are all the different influences which could impact the moment of communication. And if we try to analyze that in terms of emotion, actually we can see that there are lots of places where emotions could impact that triangle, from the desire to communicate with somebody specific, right down to what do I think about the speakers of the target language, what do I think about my classmates. It's all absolutely riddled with things which are related to emotions. And from our survey last time, from the free comments, actually in summer 2021, I just counted up the frequently mentioned words, and being friends with the other person or knowing or having a good relationship was the most frequently, out of about 100 extra comments which were counted. 24 people mentioned friends or having a good relationship or knowing the other person. Being uncomfortable came up a lot in the interviews and also a little in the free comments as well. This is a piece of artwork from students at our college, which was on an internet exhibition on Instagram. And I just introduced that because I think it makes it very vivid how tough it could be to communicate online, how you feel you're in the box. And also, as we could experience maybe this morning, if you couldn't get online, the strong emotions that we have attached to the community who are out there. So for example, love, fear, anxiety. This morning I couldn't get online, I couldn't get to my SIG, and I was experiencing an absolute tempest of emotions. My heart rate went faster and so on, and that's kind of happening now as well. So if we go back to that idea of labour and why that word could be suitable to use about students, one thing which appeared in Hochschild's definition was that it was coming from an imbalance of power. The second thing is, it sounds like it's not really a beneficial demand. If you say work, it sounds like, yeah, okay, they should face up to it, they should do the work. If you say labour, it kind of allows us to see that excessive, draining, burnout causing kind of thing, which that picture was supposed to kind of speak to how possibly the online situation, if not carefully managed, could be that much more of a labour. And in Zoom, of course, you've got your teacher very much in control. And so that's another kind of layer of labour, which depends how students conceptualize it. But if they haven't had a careful orientation to how to manage their online experience, then that could well be an extra labour. And the last point, the expression of emotion becomes some kind of commodity. Of course, in teachers' emotion labour, it's being exchanged for money, but actually in students' emotion labour, it could be being exchanged for a grade, and it could also be being exchanged for social capital, in the sense that they need to preserve their relationship with their classmates, perhaps by not participating too much. There's a really interesting outline of what is called the dilemma, discoursal dilemma of the classroom in Michael Breen, Learner Contributions to Language Learning. And he's talking about how the pedagogy function of the classroom and the social function of the classroom are always in tension. And there's very frequently ambiguity about whether the discourse which is happening is pedagogic or social. So you say, what did you do at the weekend? And they say, I go to my part-time job, and you go, went. So sometimes there's a kind of a fine line which is connected to something which may be a face threat. I haven't looked at this through the lens of pragmatics, and so, Anne, I wish that I had more chance to know about pragmatics, and I hope I'll get some feedback on how that relates to this whole question. But let's just drive on through the theories that I'm kind of looking at today. I'm kind of assuming that learning a language is a really quite a deep adjustment to our personality and to our cultural understanding. And so that quote from Shaw's book about culture and resistance to language learning seemed to me like a useful thing to have in mind when we're thinking about this. Let's look at students' idea about what they think students should do. You may be familiar with the activity of asking students to brainstorm their ground rules for the class. This year, I asked students to brainstorm their ground rules and include a rule for the teacher and a silly rule, and then go around and mark the anything surprising with an exclamation mark, the silly rule with a smiley face, and rules they thought were good with a heart. So really interestingly, one group wrote, students shouldn't make mistakes in class. Their classmates came around and put an exclamation mark on it because the classmates thought it was bizarre. But when I asked that group, they had put it there because they thought it was true, students shouldn't make mistakes in class. So it's really nice to have a way to make that explicit with students. We can see teachers shouldn't be mad for students. Good, I think that's interesting bit of emotion awareness. And students should be friendly. And the third one on this line, students should be excited. So already there are some emotions which they're feeling some kind of pressure or some kind of norm that they should try to preserve. Wonder if I can whiz this up here. When we did the survey about online classes, there were really two different kinds of response. One was students who say, if I'm active, then whether it's Zoom or not, it doesn't matter, I'm going to go for it. And the other participants were overwhelmed with how uncomfortable and tiring it had been. When I re-interviewed somebody this year who I'd also interviewed last year, it was very interesting. In retrospect, when she was looking back at it, it was just, oh, it was so tiring. And so it was funny that last year she had been quite positive about the Zoom class, and by this year she was kind of much less so. We're going to move on to look at some student quotes, which seem to me to show that the students are managing their emotions and very sensitive to the emotions of the other people in the group. And so here we've got a survey participant saying, I would feel nervous, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to communicate. This kind of message came from most of the interview participants if they were high-level students, because they were self-selected. So they were people who were willing to talk to teachers already. Somebody said many times, I couldn't care less. I really don't care what the others think. But on the whole, they were carefully trying to protect the other students and worried about the anxieties of students who were less fluent than them. What if a student asks a question and no one answers? Sometimes I don't participate as well because some of the other people can read the answer. What if nobody has the answer? Oh, then I will, because I want to make the class fun. So this student is completely consciously taking care, almost like she's playing a teacher role. And this is the same student. When doing group work with shy people, I think they can answer when they're shy. It's better to give them many times to speak. I do that sometimes. And here's me saying, you consciously do that? Yes, all of us do it. So not only her, but her friendship group seemed to also be trying to nurture the communication with the other people in the group. And this next kind of section speaks to frustration and feeling quite irritated with classmates. I don't know why they came to MIC, to our college, because MIC's class style is to speak and discuss. So what should I do? But actually, the same respondent in a very large class found that she also couldn't just kind of get quite over the Rubicon, over the barrier to communicate. So here she's saying, all member is 20, so I couldn't hands up. I'll just let you read it, and I should maybe take a time check. So she wants to be in a small group. It was really quite helpful to be interviewing and getting feedback from students about this kind of thing. In the case of Zoom classes, I wondered if students were ruminating, were kind of staying in a negative spiral because they were lonely. And this student said, this is a different student, if I make a mistake on Zoom, I feel sad. What about if you make a mistake in the classroom? My classmate says, Taijo. So the community is mitigating negative emotions when we're in the classroom in a way that was very difficult on Zoom. This wasn't true for everybody. Actually, this was a female student, and a male student who I interviewed said, if I make a mistake on Zoom, I don't care at all. But if I make a mistake in the classroom, I feel more embarrassed. So clearly it depends how they are conceptualizing the situation a bit. Now, I'd like to ask you to join me. We're going to have some audience participation. And so this is going to be fun. I'm going to ask you to categorize some tasks in relation to how demanding do you think this task would be in terms of emotion labor. Are you ready? Please unmute yourself and shout yes if you're ready. And you can calibrate your emotions. Oh, great.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, let's do it.
Yes.
So here we are. To what extent do you think the following activities would involve emotion labor for students? Can you rate them from 1 to 10, where 10 is a lot of emotion labor and 0 is no emotion labor at all? And feel free to shout out. Peer editing for a classmate, do you think that would have a lot of emotion labor? Or
8.
Anonymous or?
Yeah, it depends on.
not anonymous. No.
Not anonymous.
10. Oh,
10.
10. 10.
Interesting, isn't it? What about doing a presentation in front of 20 classmates?
12.
100.
Yeah.
Drawing a stick figure on the whiteboard in front of 20 classmates.
5, 6, depending on how well you can write.
For the bad drawers.
Cleaning the board.
0.
In the board. 1, 2.
Volunteering to answer in a class discussion on LGBTQ issues.
Just depends on the student.
8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
Answering a reading comprehension question in response to being nominated by the teacher.
8, 9, 10.
5, 6. 6.
Everything is a 10.
Being nominated by the teacher. Ooh.
Well, you see, Chiyuki, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not sure about, I think we need to get feedback from individuals about it, probably, because some students are saying, well, I don't want to call out, because I don't want to take the chance of somebody else.
Yeah, sure.
But other students might be saying, I don't really like to hear my name because it makes me feel I've done something wrong. So it seems like we were all categorizing number one as fairly demanding. I'm going to just ride roughshod over your probably better than my ideas and talk about my own sort of heuristic for measuring, for measuring these. If it's something which is going to face threat to me or to my classmates, it's going to involve more emotional labor. If it's something to do with my English level, it's probably going to involve more emotional labor. If it's something which involves more personal investment, it is as well. So cleaning the board, if the teacher's not cool, if the teacher's not a cool person, then you probably don't want to clean the board for a not cool teacher as well. But if the teacher's cool or neutral, then cleaning the board isn't such a big deal. Drawing a stick figure, I think that's probably very low because you can do it in a funny way. So you can kind of, you can moderate how you do it. So the interesting thing is to see if we could negotiate with students how they rate these as well. And this I haven't done yet. So I felt like I have a duty to sort of raise the issue, how would we mitigate emotional labor? And anonymous feedback seems terrifically useful because there are going to be variations in how students experience it. And so Google Forms was very good when we were online. And also actually showing them the anonymous graph from the Google form so that they can also see what their classmates said, probably not showing the comments. Very small slips of paper which you give out in the class and say, please write something good, something bad, and a suggestion is another way to get quick feedback. Friendship trios were mentioned by some of the interview respondents when we were talking about what's your ideal group. One person said, I like having one member who's better at English than me and one member who's less good at English so that I can explain to the member who's less good at English than me. And a lot of people mentioned trios and willingness to work with higher level students. So that does beg the question of what we can do to find good partners for our lower level students. But then maybe confidence is a main thing in there as well. I'm going to home in on number 5. If we have a more challenging or more kind of personal investment task, then if it can be presented as an opt-in rather than a kind of this class has failed if people don't talk about their favorite music, then I think that's going to be better for me as a teacher and also for students. Somebody may feel like, well, if my classmates find out that I like K-pop and they don't like K-pop, then that's our relationship ruined for the semester. So even talking about what music you like could actually be something people feel reluctant about. So we need to have alternatives there. Nominating, I'm looking at number 6 now, and having something like a question and answer chain so that they're already primed that Anne's going to ask Chiyuki and Chiyuki's going to ask Sei and Sei's going to ask Stephanie. Maybe a way that they can, so long as once they've learned how to do that, they can start to initiate a bit more. And keeping it in our awareness that students may feel both, they want their classmates to know them. One of the interview respondents said, I really want my classmates to know me, but also they may fear being known, which is something which came up again in the Breen paper about covert participation. So going forward, I think it's a very fruitful and interesting area to research using not only survey, but probably also using some kind of discourse analysis and observation. So I've got very interested in looking at positioning. And I haven't actually got anything to show in terms of research yet, because that's going to be next year's project, I think. But the idea that depending on whether you allow the students to be the knower, the person who has authority about something, the positions they're going to be able to take in the conversation are going to be impacted by that. And so maybe if we're going back to the online class situation, making the positioning as explicit as possible. So for example, when you go to your breakout room, play Junken. The winner of Junken is going to be the person who starts speaking. Or when you get into your group, the oldest, find out the birthdays, and the oldest person is going to be the person, so that there's no actual random power play. It's kind of made into something which is for a neutral reason.
I'm sorry to like interrupt, but we have to stop now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm just on my spelling slide and my references, which are also on my Adventzilla page. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. So let's offer a round of applause for Professor Ellen Head.